Hi everyone, you've just read about the story of Lot and Sodom, and today I want to use this story to illustrate and show you a little bit how we can benefit from such a story and how that might relate to our life now. Because often we read a story like that and we can just think, oh, interesting, weird, strange, ancient history, how does it relate to me? Well, first of all, what comes to my mind is that most Old Testament stories point to a future story that is at that point in the distant future. So, in this instance, if I think about the essence of the story, it is this: Lot and his family, who believe in God, they live in a deeply sinful and wicked environment. And before God's wrath is poured out and destruction comes upon this place, he calls out his people to be saved and to be spared the wrath of God. So that immediately makes me think of what Jesus says in Matthew 24, where he says, "And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds and from one end of the heavens to another." Essentially, one day Jesus will return, and before the wrath of God is poured out onto this wicked world, he will gather his chosen people again and lead them to safety. So you can clearly see the parallel. But you might still think, okay, one is the past, one is the future, what about now? Well, God's plan of salvation, God's plan to save you and all those who believe in him, doesn't just happen in the distant future, it has begun already. All of you are here today listening to me because you have heard the call of God and you want to follow him. But people respond differently to being called, and the result is sometimes tragic. So that's something that it talks about in this story that I want to illustrate a little bit to you. So if we look at this story, the angels come to town to save them, and people respond very differently. First of all, Lot, he talks to his sons-in-law and he tells them, "You need to leave with me and you will be saved." But they just laugh him off. So they stay and they perish. They didn't hear, they didn't listen. They heard, but they didn't listen to the call of God. And then if you remember what you've read, Lot himself, it says he hesitated. And it sounds like he was faffing about all night and it was getting daybreak. And at the end, he does leave, but the angels pretty much have to drag him out of town. He was so reluctant to leave this sinful place because he got accustomed to it. Maybe he loved living there. He was comfortable. He had his house, his friends, his business. And then it's hard sometimes to let go of those things, isn't it? Or look at his wife who went along then, but she had such a longing for Sodom. And even though she was told, do not look back under any circumstances, she had such a strong longing and sadness about leaving Sodom that she could not bear it. And she did look back and she perished. Or look at Lot's sisters. They went along happily enough by all accounts. There's nothing that says they were reluctant or anything. But they only left outwardly. They followed God's call, but in their heart they were still in Sodom. They've lived in this place for so long that all the sinful attitudes were so ingrained in their hearts that they couldn't leave it behind. So even though outwardly they left, in their hearts they didn't, and that results in some terrible choices that they made later on. Now, how does that relate to you and me? I think in many ways, because we also have to respond to this call. God calls us to come out of this sinful place. We often hear the phrase that we should be in the world but not of it. It's something that Jesus talks about in John 17 when he prays for us before his death. Now, what does that mean? To me, that means that we're not called on to leave this world in a physical way just yet, but in a spiritual way. That even though we live in a wicked and sinful society, we're meant to be different. We're meant to shine his light into this world, even though it's difficult and it often is costly. And that's why many who are called, they just laugh it off and they say, "No, that can't be right. Surely there won't be punishment. And this kind of reminds us what we read in Genesis, isn't it? Where the snake asked, no, surely God would not say this or do that. And they reject God's call and they will perish. And many of us are like Lot. They hear the call, they know what they're meant to do, they know how to proceed, but they hesitate. And if we hesitate too long, we might stay behind in Sodom and never leave it. There's a great danger there. Or we might be like Sodom's wife, that we, leave our life that we lived and we try to do different, but in our heart we have a deep longing for our old way of life because we feel like we might be missing out and that maybe we've made the wrong decision or that there's better things for us out there. There is not. No matter how far and how wide we search the world, we will never find this satisfaction, this longing, this love that only God can give us, this sense of purpose. And nothing can save but faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Many of us are like Lot's daughters who, hear the call of God and follow happily enough and try to live their own life and maybe go to church and tell their friends they're Christians. But in their heart, they still carry Sodom. And this is just something that happens when you live in a wicked and fallen world. You get kind of accustomed to it. And over time, things that, are not normal in the sense that they're not the way God intended, they become normalized to us because that's what everyone around us does. And sometimes things that are not acceptable to God become slowly more acceptable to us because it's acceptable to everyone around us. So what can we learn from this, really? For me, it's this. I want to encourage you all. Leave Sodom behind. Follow God's call. Don't hesitate. Don't look back. And don't carry Sodom in your heart. God bless you all.